So welcome to our first of the lecture series for understanding the self. This is Jennifer Seniel, your instructor for the semester. Okay, so our topic for today is actually about the philosophical view of the self according to different philosophers. If you have read your book already, you would see that there are several philosophers mentioned in different periods, and we will be highlighting some of their concepts about the self. Okay, so our learning outcomes or objectives for this lesson. So towards the end of this video, you should be able to explain the importance of understanding the self. Also, you should be able to describe and discuss the different notions of the self from the points of view of different philosophers across time and place. Compare and contrast how the self has been represented in different philosophical schools, and you should be able to examine oneself against the different views of the self. Okay, so usually the first question that we are asked always at the start of the school or even when meeting someone else and meeting new people, iba ang tinatanong sa atin, what is your name? Or what do you do? Okay, now, when someone asks you, how would you describe yourself? Can you really describe yourself? Do you really know yourself? Okay. Now, why are we taking this course? Why is it important for college students to know or to understand themselves? Okay. So basically, life is a challenging. Life is basically challenging. Okay. So you should be able to know yourself so that you would be able to survive the challenges that you would be facing once you step out of college. Okay. And along the semester, you should be able to discover yourself more. Okay, we would be discussing different aspects of your personality. Okay, now let's go back to our lesson. So first philosopher is Socrates. Okay, Socrates actually is one of the Greek philosophers. Actually, is the first philosopher who focused on identifying the self. There are other philosophers or Greek philosophers who were focused on discovering the existence of things. Okay, like for example, Thales, Heraclitus, and others. They were focused on identifying the origin of matter, the origin of things. Okay, but Socrates actually was the first to dissect, or he was the first to have an idea about the self. Okay, so for Socrates, he actually believed that every man is composed of body and soul. So there are two components for Socrates. Okay, so you have the body and you have a separate entity which is the soul. Okay, so for him to know yourself, you should be able to bring your inner self to life. Okay, according to him, the man who does not follow good fails to do so because he does not recognize it. Okay? So, innately, we're actually born to be good. If you don't identify or if you don't see the good in yourself, ang lumalabas sa atin is yung mga negative characteristics natin. Okay? So, parang ganun siya. So, for Socrates, you should be able to know yourself or know thyself by analyzing yourself. You have to get to know yourself first. Okay? So, for Socrates, he actually also said that the virtue is the deepest and most basic propensity of man. Okay? So, self-knowledge is a source of all wisdom. Once you know yourself, doon na mag-start na lumabas yung wisdom natin. Okay? So, mas gumagaling tayo na or mas naiintindihan natin yung mga bagay sa paligid natin once we start to know ourselves. Okay? Sabi nga nila, 'di ba? It all should start within ourselves. Dapat lagi nag-uumpisa sa sarili natin. Okay? So next we have Plato. Plato is actually the student of Socrates, and he actually supported his advisors or his teacher's philosophy. So for him, the ideal self is also the perfect self. Okay? So man is also a dual nature of body and soul. But for Plato, uh, he added three components of the soul. So first, he have the rational soul, the spirited soul, and the appetitive soul. So for the rational soul, it actually allows us to be omniscient or all-knowing. Okay? So yung rational soul allows us to be thinkers. Okay? We use our intellect So, the spirited soul naman allows us to be contemplative. It allows man to regain perfections. Okay? So, when you contemplate, you think of your emotions. Okay? So, emotions natin, the feelings that we have, all of these are because of the spirited soul. And last, we have the appetitive soul. So, the appetitive soul naman is in charge for our basic urges. Okay? So, our desire to eat, desire to drink, um, also yung sexual urges, kasama yan sa appetitive soul. Okay? Now, these three components of the soul should be in sync or it should be harmonious with itself for us to attain happiness. Okay? If not, kapag hindi magkasundo si rational soul as a spirited soul and si appetitive soul, may chaos ay nararamdaman. Okay? For example, di ba? Spirited soul, for example, emotion mo, you're feeling sad. So, ang appetitive soul mo, it would trigger you to drink. Okay? Yung iba, yung ibang teenagers, ganun ginagawa. They drink. Okay? Or sometimes they do binge eating. Okay? So, insect na ngayon si spirited soul at saka si appetitive soul. Na dahil malungkot ako, gusto ko uminom. Pero si rational soul, yung thinking mind mo, sabi wag kang uminom kasi it's not good for you. So, nagkakaroon ng chaos. Okay? So, hindi nagkakaintindihan yung tatlo. So, anong mangyayari? You would be confused of what to do. So, hindi mo ma-achieve yung happiness. Okay? So, yun yung ano nila. Si Socrates and Plato, they both believed in the dual nature of body and soul. So, for them, meron tayong body and meron ding soul. Now, we also have during the medieval period, si Saint Augustine, and then we also have Thomas Aquinas. Kanina si Socrates and Plato, they are the Greek philosophers. Okay? Now, for Saint Augustine, he is known for his quote, "Si falor sum," or if I am mistaken, I am. Okay? For Augustine, he also believed in the bifurcated nature of man. Bifurcated meaning there are also two nature. So, meron pa rin tayo body and soul. But it is by the illumination of God or by the divine light that we can have knowledge. Okay? So, kaya lang natin nakikilala ang sarili natin once we acknowledge the presence of God. Okay? So, only some divinity can show man what is true. Okay? So, for him, nire-relate na natin ang faith natin para mas makilala natin ang sarili natin. Okay? Now, we also have Thomas Aquinas. Now, for Thomas Aquinas, there is self-knowledge when you acknowledge that you are actually composed of matter and form. Okay? So, matter is actually the common stuff that makes up everything. So, pag hinawakan mo yung sarili mo, na-touch mo yung skin mo, so that is matter. Yung essence or the form is actually the importance of your body or of your soul. Okay? So, lahat daw ng mga living organisms would have matter. Okay? But, what separates man from others, from other living organisms, is our soul. Okay? So, for Thomas Aquinas, he actually have the theory of self-knowledge, and he said that all our self-knowledge is dependent on our experience of the world around us. Okay? Mas nakikilala natin yung sarili natin because of the experiences that we have. For example, broken-hearted ka. Di ba? Pag nasaktan ka, mas nalalaman mo na strong person ka pala. Kasi eventually, nakaka-survive ka. Nakaka-move on ka from whatever it is that you have been experiencing. Okay? So, Aquinas also argues that our awareness of ourselves is triggered and shaped by our experiences of objects in our environment. So, yun nga. Isang example nga. 'Di ba? Pag may pinagdadaanan tayo, okay? So, nagiging aware tayo dun sa sa personality natin. Mas nagiging aware tayo sa strengths natin and also our weaknesses because of our experiences. Okay? So, ngayon ba, medyo nakikita nyo na ba or mas naiintindihan nyo na ba yung sarili nyo in a philosophical view? So, I hope medyo nakaka-relate kayo or I hope you could relate some of your experiences already from these four philosophers. So, next philosopher that we have is Rene Descartes. Okay? He is famous for his quote, "Cogito ergo sum." For I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, he actually believed that man is actually a thinking entity distinct from the body. Okay? So you should use your mind and thinking abilities to investigate and develop himself or develop yourself. Okay? Kung ano yung inisip mo na magiging ikaw yun. For example, most of you are education majors. Most of my students are education majors. Or sabihin natin yung mga FM, yung mga financial management students. So, if you think that you would be future managers in the future, you would be one. Okay? Or if you think that you would fail in the subject, you would fail. Okay? So, ganun yung pinapoint on the Descartes. Now, once you think of something, it would eventually be embodied in your activities. Okay? So, pag inisip mo that you would succeed in this course, eventually you would do that. Or eventually you would achieve that. Okay? So, ito yung isa sa mga parang naging philosophy ko din siya for a while na I think therefore I am. Pag inisip ko na kaya ko siyang gawin, makakayanan ko siya kahit na mahirap. Okay? So, ganun yun. So, next, you also have David Hume. So, for David Hume, the self is the bundle theory of mind. Okay? So, meron siyang theory na ganyan. So, for him, man has no clear and intelligible idea of the self. Okay, sorry. So, for Hume, yung isang tao is actually a self or it is actually a collection of different impressions or different perceptions. Okay? So, yung impressions are actually basic objects of our experience or sensation. For example, humawa ka ng ice. Okay? So, ang ice, syempre, ay cold. So, the cold sensation is actually already an impression. Okay? So, ipunin mo lahat ng mga sensations na na-experience mo. Lahat cold, hot, or ano pa yung mga basic sensations. Lahat ng na-experience na through your senses. Those are impressions. Okay? So, collection siya. Yung isang individual daw, a man, is basically just a collection of all those experiences. Okay? So, then, you also have your ideas. So, ideas are actually copies of impressions. Ano ba yung ideas? Yun nga sa isip natin. For example, um, the idea of being in love. Okay? So, that is an idea. Hindi naman siya impression kasi hindi mo naman ginamit yung mata mo para ma-feel yung love. Though, basically, meron na in love at first sight. I mean, yung ideas is um, lumalabas siya because of our intellect. Okay? So, for Hume, the self is actually a collection of these impressions, your ideas. So, isa tayong bundle ng mga iba't ibang experiences natin. Okay? So, iba-iba tayo ng mga experiences. Okay? Iba sa inyo, masaya sa buhay. I hope lahat naman ay masaya kahit may mga problems sa pinagdaraanan. Okay? So, yung iba siguro, dumaan sa maraming hardships bago na-attain or na-achieve ang happiness today. Okay? I have seen students, I know you are struggling with this new normal of education. So, meron ako mga students na nagpo-post na online student, online seller, tapos push para sa pangarap, push para sa future, okay? So, yan, iba-iba tayo ng mga na-experience ngayon. So, for you, ayun ang kanyang philosophy, that all of us will just be a bundle of our impressions or our experiences. Next, we have Emmanuel Kant, okay? So, for Emmanuel Kant, he actually contradicts the previous philosophers that we have. Okay? So, parang mahirap daw na nagsiseparate pa ang mind and body. So, for him, the man is the only creature who governs and directs himself and his actions. Okay? Actually, Kant proposes that you should not use um, a man as a tool and it should be treated equally. Okay? So, si Kant, pinapromote niya ang respect for self. Okay? So next we have Gilbert Ryle. Okay, for Gilbert Ryle, the self is actually how you behave. Okay, so the collection of our behaviors would be your identity. Okay? So, Ryle actually summarizes the essential elements of the dualistic view of the self. Okay? So, he supported the previous philosophers na there's mind and body as separate entities. Okay? But, for him, the self is not an entity one can locate and analyze, but simply the convenient name that people use to refer to all the behaviors that people make. Okay? So, yung personality daw natin, I mean, the self, is actually just composed of different behaviors. Okay? So, syempre, meron tayong good attitude or good behavior. Sometimes, meron din tayong naughty side. So, ano siya, collection siya ng ating mga behavior. Yung ano natin, the self. Okay? So, next, or I think, so next, and last na natin to, is Maurice Marlux. Okay? So, for him, the self is an embodied subjectivity. Okay? So, the division between the mind and the body is a product of confused thinking. Okay? So, si Merleau-Ponty, ito na, siya yung nagsabi na hindi naman talaga separate ang body and soul. Kasi nga, the mind and the body are so intertwined that they could not be separated from one another. Okay? So, yung mga na-experience natin, yung mga nararamdaman natin, hindi siya separate. Hindi siya separate as a soul. Okay? Lahat ng mga napagdadaanan natin could not be separated from our bodies. Okay? So, for Merleau-Ponty, ano siya, the self is actually one. One entity ang mind and body. Naka-fuse ang ano natin, yung concept natin of our thinking and also of our physical bodies. Okay? So now, let's summarize all of this. So yan, so for Socrates, Plato, and Augustine, the self is actually an immortal soul that exists over time. Okay? So, immortal soul, ibig sabihin nga, di ba, dagdag ko lang, nakalimutan ko palang i-mention. Kanina, minimension nga na meron tayong body. So, yung body yung mortal, tapos, yung, ano natin, yung souls natin are immortal. Okay, kahit daw mamatay tayo dito, nag-exist daw ang soul natin to go out. I mean, to do other things. No, basta nag-exist ang immortal soul. Okay? So, next we have Descartes. So, for Descartes, he believed that the self is a thinking thing distinct from the body. Now, John Locke, hindi natin siya na-mention, but i-add ko na lang din. So, personal identity is made possible by self-consciousness. For John Locke, once you have your concept of the self, mas nakikilala mo yung sarili mo. Okay? So, sorry kay David yung na-coveran yung picture niya. So, for you, there is no self, just a bundle of constantly changing perceptions passing through the theater of our minds. For Emmanuel Kahn, the self is a unifying subject, an organizing consciousness that makes the intelligible experience possible. For Thomas Aquinas, our self-knowledge depends on our experience. For Gilbert Ryle, the self is the way people behave. And last, for Maurice Merleau-Ponty, the self is embodied subjectivity. Okay? So now, the real question is, who are you? Who among these philosophers do you agree with? Okay? So that's one question. Kanino ka ba nag-agree sa kanila? All of these philosophies are right? Kasi at some point, tama din naman. Okay? It's really a hard question to know yourself. Okay? Ako nga, minsan tinatanong ko pa rin sarili ko, ano ba talaga ako? Sino ba talaga ako? Okay? So, every day, we experience a lot of things. Araw-araw, nagbabago yung mga nararamdaman natin. Minsan, makaka-receive tayo ng mga good news, minsan bad news. So, this actually affects our thinking of the self. Okay? Now, as college students, I hope that the struggles that you are experiencing right now would actually help you to be a better individual. So, there are different philosophies for understanding the self. So, I hope you could relate to some of the philosophies mentioned. Okay? So, our next lesson or our next topic would be about the self, culture, and society. So, watch out for our next lecture series. Okay, so that would be all for today. I hope you learned something from our video. Bye!